Welcome to another episode of Emoji Chat, and again with my beautiful wife Sandra. And today we're going to do a bit of a continuation to the three-part episode of emotional communication. Do you want to introduce the topic for today?
Yes. So this is the third part. So in the first part, we talk about emotional communication, what it is, and how we came to this concept, and how can we apply it and everything. The second one, we talk about that internal dialogue, which is like our own communication with ourselves. And this one, we wanted to talk about communication in relationships, most of it with our partner. We can use it for everyone, but maybe the most difficult is with our partner because,
Most intense.
yeah, it is intense. So we want to talk about two things. One is expectations, and the second one is validation.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll get into the nitty-gritty of those two concepts, but first the quote of the day. This one is from Eleanor Roosevelt, and she said, "Great minds discuss ideas. Average minds discuss events, small minds discuss people." And it's got a lot to do with what we're going to talk about today, because precisely one of the ways that we can avoid conflict in relationships is by not focusing on events or details, but really on the transcendental background of what's going on in the actual event, right? So the what's behind it really. And maybe I'll start explaining what the concept of expectation and validation means for me. So for me, expectation can be defined as the root to all disappointment, the root of all disappointment. What I mean by this is that um, it's great to have hopes or to try to achieve something, but when you expect it to happen, you're setting a milestone, you're setting a like a anchor in your own life process, life progress, that this event or this circumstance has to happen for you to be fulfilled, happy, satisfied, or whatever. So you have expectations in your when you have expectations in your relationships, that means that at some point you're empowering your partner, or a coworker or friend or dad or mom, whatever, your son, your other significant one in that relationship, to be, you empower them to make that happen for you rather than keep it to yourself. So for me, expectation means the root of all disappointment, and validation has kind of that two-edged sword role, right? That there is a positive part of validation, and that is when, and we'll talk more about that later, but when you talk about your ability to understand your own feelings, validate them, accept them for what they are, right? And then try to express them. So to validate that part of it. And also in the relationship, the ability of that we should have of accepting the other people's feelings, so validating someone's feelings without judging them. That's the positive part for me of validation, and we'll talk more. But the negative part of validation is that unhealthy need for being constantly approved by someone. That type of validation, looking for constant validation in that sense, for me, that is unhealthy, and we need to avoid it. And we'll talk more about that. But what are your thoughts on expectations and validation?
For me, expectations is like a mental lock, or like a mental jail, where you have your own vision of things or paradigms, and you just think everybody else sees the same, in the same way you see things, no? So when you think like that, conflict will come because you are not giving a place for the other person to show you how they think, so you can get to an understanding of each other. You just think, because this is how it is, I see it this way, so everybody has to see it this way, so I expect you to act in the vision that I have. So if I have a vision of something and I will act this way because I see it like this, I expect you to do the same. But maybe your vision is another one. So the problem with that is that it will bring conflict if you don't communicate, because you don't you don't give a place for the people to show you that they see things differently. And with validation, I see the same thing. I think the same as you think. I think there is a positive way and a negative way. The negative way is when you look validation as in approval with other people, but you do need to have internal validation. You need to examine your thoughts, and then when you are going through your feelings, you need to validate them, so that way you can communicate it better. Because if you don't validate your own feelings, then it will be hard to communicate so other people can understand.
All right. So when we talk about expectation and validation, now you guys know what we mean by those two concepts. And I wanted to discuss on a practical level with two experiences, maybe to oppose extreme experiences, something that is quite silly in a sense, and then later on that expectation validation experience on the most extremes. Because for us, when we were in that negative cycle of emotional addiction, um, we nearly got divorced. I don't know how many times we got divorced, but we could have gotten divorced, I don't know, 100 times, I don't know, but in 5 6 years it was kind of like a constant cycle of when we felt lonely, we didn't know how to really interact with each
It
other.
was like every discussion was leading to the point or of we cannot do this anymore
Yeah,
because
we
it's not
can't we
working.
can't live together.
Yeah, exactly.
It kind of always led, every major discussion will lead into, we gotta go our separate ways.
Yeah.
And in a sense, that was the extreme thing, right? But I think we can use the silly bit first, so people understand what we mean. But for example, in terms of the expectation, something that for me was very clear when you have a conflict, and I've always been this way, and then we didn't know this of each other because we've never before getting being married, we didn't live together, we had never coexisted in the same environment for too long, so we were getting to know each other at first, and for the longest time, I think for years, my expectation of conflict resolution was to apologize verbally. So you will go to the person and kind of you have to look for some level of retribution or restoration to the situation, and then you will communicate, hey, you know what, I'm sorry, I did something wrong, but I'm sorry. So for me, it was quite easy just to, when I knew I messed up, just to go to you and say, hey, you know what, baby, I'm sorry. But then you will come and do the same. For the longest time, I always thought, "Freaking, she never says, she never apologizes." But for you, it was different, right?
It was quite the opposite because for me, verbalizing didn't mean that much, but it was the behavior. If I'm angry at you, we are at a conflict. I usually don't talk too much. I wouldn't stay with you in the same room or just look or talk to you, things like that. As soon as I change my behavior and maybe I cook dinner for you or ask you how are you and how was the day,
Try to give me a kiss or be,
something
gentle,
like that.
whatever.
So my behavior will change and I will be like loving and caring again. For me, that was the way of apologizing. Because for me,
it was like offensive. Like, I'm angry and she's coming to kiss me.
like nothing
what the heck?
happened, right? But for me, if you come and say sorry and then maybe go back to your room, maybe you are, I don't know, working on the computer and you come and say, I'm sorry, because you realize, and then you come back to the computer. For me, it's like, he doesn't care. He's just saying it because when we are angry, I don't cook dinner for him. So he can't say sorry and that's it. But for me, that was not the way to apologize. Then we realized later on that for you, saying sorry was really important. And then for me, the behavior was really important. But in my mind, in the way I saw things in that time, saying sorry didn't mean that you were really sorry. And for you, even if I behaved that way, that I was sorry and I wanted to be with you again, because I didn't say sorry, it was like it's not enough. That's not the way to apologize. So we had to learn that.
And that is the first principle of avoiding expectations, is that um, we need to understand that the world that we see, nobody else sees it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to go into any environment, any conversation, any relationship thinking, if I see it white, everybody's seeing it white. Because for you, it's so logic, for ourselves, it's just white. How can somebody not see it white or black or whatever? The point is, I'm seeing it, but then I should come to any relationship or, in any form thinking that what I'm seeing, only myself is seeing it. Only I am seeing this in a certain way. If nobody else will see it this way, and then it will ease avoiding expectations. And I think it's related to the quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. And you were mentioning this before as well, that when we focus on ideas instead of people or events, because our egotistic minds tend to really just focus on the events, on like the details. We have this need for breaking everything into little details so we can consume it and then justify every paradigm that we have about ourselves
Exactly.
and the world. And that act of trying to find every detail of circumstances will keep us on the people and the events, rather than thinking, hey, what is behind all this? What is the idea? What is really behind the conflict that just transpired? And I think it's very important that we come out of that shell, that we understand that it's not related to the event. And I love a quote from Helen Schuckman, the author of A Course in Miracles, where she says that the error of thought needs to be corrected at the level it occurs. Meaning, if the error or the conflict happens, like you mentioned, on the feelings, trying to understand each other's feelings, but then we're focused on the surface, on the events, then the conflict is never going to be resolved, because we're at a different level.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, talking about that phrase that we read before, I think it's the way when we communicate, because we were talking for expectation. The first way we can try to resolve it is communication, because expectation is based on not communicating, because you have to, your vision is the first thing. So when you communicate, then you can see that there is not only one vision, as you say. Not everybody sees the same thing you see or the way you see it. So when we communicate is the way we can break those expectations.
Okay, so you're saying that the antidote to creating
Exactly.
circumstances of expectation is to really have an open communication.
Yeah.
Don't think that the other person is thinking what you're thinking, but really communicate what your needs are, what your thoughts are, how you view the circumstance before engaging in the conflict. Right?
The problem is that when we try to communicate those things, we focus on what you were saying, criticizing the person, saying you do this, and I don't like it, or you did that the other day, and things like that. Or on the events, like this always happens, this is how you do things, and the other day you didn't clean the part you were supposed to clean, and things like that. And in that way, we don't, there is no emotional communication, there is not connection. You are just talking about events, but you don't focus on the idea or the feeling. So you never get to resolving a way of resolving that problem, because you are not talking about what matters, which is I feel like this.
And it's important that both are on the same level. Meaning,
Exactly.
if someone is talking about events and you're talking about emotions, then there's gonna be a disconnect.
Yeah, this is a complete disconnection. So that's why you need to, one of the things we learned that you have to communicate these things is talking out from the point of I feel like this happened in this situation, so I feel like this, and I would like not to feel like this. Maybe doing this, I wouldn't feel like this. So in this way, you are not criticizing the other person. You are not focusing on the details, which take you just to a power, fighting for power, to see who has
Who's right?
who's right, who is the most right of both of you. And that way you just create more conflict, but you have to focus on what you feel and then just communicate it to the other person. And in that way you start validating, which is the next thing we were going to talk about. When you communicate your feelings, and you validate them. Yes,
before communicating.
exactly. You just share those feelings, and then you can get to a point of negotiation where you are asking that person to help you in your path of getting better, being a better person, or just feeling better. It's like a team effort, but it's not criticizing or saying you are this, you are that, you always do this. That kind of communication doesn't create any connection at all.
Agreed. And I think it's important to understand those 2 points on validation. First, it's about finding out or validating your own feelings. Like you said, do I feel angry or is it just frustrated? Do I feel frustrated because I feel powerless or because I feel isolated from my relationship? So all of those different points need to be validated internally before expressing it. So we should take the time, even, obviously when you are in the heat of the moment, but if it's not doing, then post conflict, please, the advice is you got to communicate with yourself first, which is what we talked on the past episode, is the internal dialogue. But validate them. Like, hey, I feel angry, but maybe it's not angry. I feel frustrated because it's happened 10 times. Okay, so then express it. It's not that you're angry, but that you're frustrated because you've done it 10 times, and the repetition of the same circumstance makes me, like you say, pulling on the eye, it makes me feel this way. And then that's the part of validation that happens internally, but it's very important that if we are on the other end of that conversation in the relationship, is that we validate those feelings without judging. Because the point is, hey, if you're expressing to me your feelings, you could say, but you shouldn't feel that way. Well, that's not for you to decide. If she feels that way, that's already happened. So that's her reality. It's your reality in this case if we're talking about ourselves. But the right approach to validation will be, hey, okay, so you're feeling angry, and these circumstances make you feel angry. All right, so now I understand your reaction, perhaps, or try to understand how that has affected the conflict, and then just accept it. Accept that the other person is feeling in a certain way without judging.
Exactly. And usually the event or the situation is not the real problem, but the message that people think,
Behind it.
yeah, is behind it. So maybe you don't clean what you were supposed to clean, or you leave the clothes on the floor. So it's not that what is making me angry, is probably the message that I'm receiving, that is in my mind. Is if he loves me or if he cares about my well-being, he wouldn't do this. But that's my way of seeing things. So that's why I have to communicate it, because maybe for you, you are not sending that message, but I'm receiving that message. So I have to communicate that so you can know where my feelings come from. And you cannot say, well, you're crazy because you feel this way, because I'm not saying that when I do this. You have to be aware, and you have to say, I understand. And you cannot change how people feel just by saying you shouldn't feel this way, or that's not right to feel this way because of this. It is already happened, so you just have to acknowledge what they're feeling, and just try to be supportive,
Just
and
listening, really, yeah.
exactly,
It's about
and
accepting.
support, and saying, okay, you feel this way, and maybe we can do this, so we don't
Yeah, but
get.
without getting into a solution, I think it's more on
Mm-hmm.
understanding where the conflict comes really at that level.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it takes us to the negative part of validation, and the extreme example that we were discussing earlier in the episode, that nearly took us constantly to that edge of divorce. Right, like every major discussion will
Mm-hmm.
turn into you know what, I can't do this no more. I'm gonna walk out, because at that level, and I recognize that it happened to me at a very extreme level, that I was constantly looking for your validation. I had empowered you with the expectation that you were, meant to make me happy, to really, I needed to buy everything off of you. Like, I needed to really, every decision I would make, every feeling that I will have, every circumstance, every situation that I will, face, I was always looking for your judgment. I was always looking for your validation. Like, how is she going to react? And it is important to manage the relationship and those circumstances. But when it's taken to that unhealthy level of, I gave you all the power to know whether I'm right or wrong, happy or not happy, etc. It was really unhealthy for me, and it was just bad. It was wrong.
And that comes from, I think it starts when there is a disconnection with ourselves, and we start, because we cannot validate ourselves, then we look for validation outside. And the problem is that when we are disconnected with ourselves, it's really hard to connect with other people. And so usually the feedback we are going to receive from them in our mind is going to be negative, even if they are saying positive things. So it is never going to work looking for validation to feel better. It's going to be maybe for 2 seconds, but then after that you won't feel okay because you are totally disconnected with yourself.
It can be because the power of making me happy is not on you.
Exactly.
So we need to understand that we make ourselves happy. Right? And I think that's what took us to that extreme, that constant extreme of always wanting to walk out, because between feeling lonely and then the fact that I had empowered you to do something you couldn't do, which is make me happy. It really brought us into this cycle of negativity and just
because you get to the point where you think there is no solution for this, and the real problem was not that there was no solution, is that we were not communicating properly. We were discussing events, we were criticizing each other, but we were not talking about our feelings. We were just spitting our feelings out to make sure
to attack the other, really.
Yeah,
I mean,
and to prove that you are doing things because I feel like this.
Yeah, look
and
what you've made me feel.
Yeah, and look at this and at that, and you start talking about all the events that have been happening those years. But the truth is that the real problem for us in that time was that we didn't know how to communicate, and we were not paying attention to the important part, which was the feelings, and we were not focusing the level that we had at the level that we had to fix things. We were going in the surface, just discussing details and losing ourselves in the details.
So I guess we could wrap it up with those advices, those tips, right? So really be open in the communication, like just express it, and then help the other understand what you're seeing, because he's not seeing what you're seeing unless you tell him or tell her, right? So unless you express it, no one is gonna actually understand what you're feeling, what you're seeing, how you're seeing the situation. So be open about communicating that communication, but also the fact that you need to validate yourself. So you need to understand what you're going through. And then once you know what you're going through, you're able to express it better. But I think the real advice here is you don't empower anybody else to make you happy. So only you really can make yourself happy. So you need to understand that the power of those circumstances, those situations is within you. So if you displace that power, then it's just never going to resolve the situations, because even if I want you to make me happy, you can't make me happy. So it's about understanding, and we talk about happiness like it's a a yuppie world, but it really is maybe not just happy, but it's satisfied or content or resolve my problems. It's about those internal conflicts and accepting that it's the power is within us, right? And I guess this is just about open communication. So yeah, I think those are the advice we want to leave. And I guess one of the results, if I may, is that we're able now, at least I can speak for myself, but I think I speak for you as well, that we're now able to see each other for a lot more for what we really are. Right? Like before, we have made a kind of like an image of what Sandra was for me, but now I'm able to really have a more unfiltered version of Sandra, and I have to say it's absolutely beautiful. So I think it's just that we need to apply it. So empower yourselves. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye bye.